Hey everybody, lovely to see you. So happy to be here. Lockdown coming to a close. Everybody's got masks on. Who's that back there? Get your mask on. There we go. All right. Just, you have the daughter? You just put some effort into keeping her quiet, and then there's no problem. But put some effort into keeping her quiet. Do your best. One of my, Kim, can you move to the side so I can see you? Damodar this way, Mason that way. I'm trying to split you guys up already. And then, that's good. That's just a little better. One of my elders when I was a young man, he told me, if you want to make God laugh, tell him all your plans. And even when I heard that, I knew that he was quoting something to me. I knew that wasn't, his original saying. So anyway, we're going back 30 years now. In Japan, he told me this. Maybe it was 1992, so whatever. It was 29 years ago in Japan. I was a monk, and he was in charge of that area, and I was there doing some ministry work, some missionary work. I would have been 19 or 20, and he made this comment to me. He was in his 40s. Now I'm older than he was at that time, but he was like a venerable elder. He still is. He's in his 70s now. If you want to make God laugh, tell him all your plans. So I thought about another verse today that I want to discuss. But I want to go over the history of that term. And so I'm going to go a little fast and just roll through it. So you guys do your absolute best to just stay on point with me. Okay. So anyway, that quote comes from Woody Allen. The famous director. I'm sure he must be a screenplay writer as well, right? Yeah, he writes screenplays too. And he must be Jewish, right? Yeah. So Woody Allen said that. So it's like, that's who my elder was quoting. I don't know if he even knew that. Woody Allen has sort of a mixed reputation. I don't want to get into that. He's not really a huge factor here. But anyway, so it goes back to Yiddish. En Mensch tracht und Gott lacht is Yiddish. The man thinks and God laughs. Tracht and lacht. It's a rhyming saying. En Mensch tracht und Gott lacht. I don't know how my Yiddish pronunciation is. What do you guys think? I'm getting approval by my brethren. It's a rhyming saying. The man thinks and God laughs. You follow? But that Yiddish saying, Yiddish is kind of a corrupted Jewish German that developed. Yeah, sure. So where did that come from? Because it's only a couple hundred years old, that saying in Yiddish. Yiddish also isn't that old, but that saying in Yiddish is not that old. So it goes back to German. There's actually a precursor in German to it. And the precursor in German is Der Mensch denkt und Gott lenkt. The man thinks and God directs. Der Mensch denkt und Gott lenkt. So denkt and lenkt. Lenkt means directs, and denkt means to think. You follow this? So it's another rhyming thing. Denkt and lenkt, trocked and locked. So there was a thing they did where they tried to make everything rhyme. Does that make sense? So, I got an unrhyming saying. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plan. It's called a conditional statement. You say if, then. If you want to do this, then you do that. I got a conditional statement. But they were linked. The two concepts were linked. One way you link concept is you rhyme them together. That's an old way of doing it. It requires some poetic skill to be able to pick the appropriate terms. When I think of rhyming language, I think of limericks. You know, like there once was a girl named Sue and she didn't know what to do, and it's like it doesn't, I don't think it's very sophisticated. Rhyming limericks, they almost sound like something you hear in a bar as a joke as opposed to some type of poetic ability. Of course, we do encounter rhyming all the time in music lyrics, which are really modern day poetry. You know, when you think of all the music lyrics that you've memorized over time from your favorite songs and pondered how they speak to you, you're really engaging with modern day poetry. Songwriters and lyricists are really, they're the modern day poets. People used to read poetry on a regular basis. They don't so much anymore. It used to be that you would read great literature and memorize, you know, Homer, you know, and you'd memorize Shakespeare. And then you'd memorize, you know, people from your area. So maybe you'd do William Blake and Kipling if you were, and if you were from England, or you'd do Thoreau and Emerson if you were from the States, but you would have, or Rousseau if you were from France. Everybody would have, you know, people did memorize. Kant if you were from Germany, and you would learn, you know, poetry and philosophy, and you memorize, and people wrote in a very purposeful and you could say artificial way, in that they took the time to construct aphorisms, tight philosophical sayings that were capable of being memorized and then recalled later, and you would ponder them and derive meaning from them. So anyway, if you want to make God laugh, then show him all your plans. That conditional statement stuck in my head because it linked those two concepts. One way to do that, traditional way to do that, is through rhyming them. And that's what the Jewish did. Der Mensch tragt und Gott lacht. That the man thinks and God laughs. But they were just copying the Germans. Der Mensch denkt und Gott lenkt. And it wasn't laughing. I thought the Jews added something cool with the laughing idea. It creates a sense of like that God is so far above you and all of your conceptions of what your purpose is and what life's about aren't really to be taken so seriously in the grand scheme of things. Hey, Harry Buck, move to one side or the other. You're sitting in a place where I can't see you. Just figure it out. You haven't helped it. Don't sit between the two cameras. Figure it out. You can do it, buddy. Thank you. You guys follow this? In general, it's disturbing to me because I want to make eye contact with you, and that makes it next to impossible. Der Mensch tragt und Gott lacht. Der Mensch denkt und Gott lenkt. So they didn't have a word that rhymed with tragt for thinks. That meant that God disposes or makes it happen. So they had to go with something humorous, and God laughs. But it works because it does communicate something of our smallness and God's greatness. You guys following this? If you don't, tough luck, because I'm moving fast. I'm playing it fast and loose tonight. All right. That idea of rhyming things actually goes back to Latin. And it goes back to the guy who wrote The Imitation of Christ, Kempis, the very famous Catholic theologian in the 1400s. And so, have you guys ever heard that, The Imitation of Christ? very, very famous Catholic work on theology and living a spiritual life. Extremely well known. But not like where if you were just a Mexican girl growing up and going to a Catholic church that you would necessarily have heard of it. You have to sort of dig into Catholic theology a little bit. But here's what he wrote. Homo proponet y Deus disponet. Man proposes and God disposes. Homo proponent. Like homosexual, like someone who loves themselves. Homo means man. So, homo proponent, the man proposes. Udeo, Dios. Actually, it comes from theos, actually. It goes all the way back to Greek. But like theology. And it becomes Dios, which is Spanish for God. E Deus disponet, and God disposes. Man proponent, disponent. You follow? It rhymes. So Kemp came up with this. And he was building on, actually, the Latin translation of the Bible, what's called the Vulgate. Yeah, Jerome's Latin Vulgate. So the Bible is written in Greek. The Bible is pretty quickly translated by St. Jerome into Latin. That Latin version is called the Vulgate. It is the standard book of the Catholic Church. And so Catholic goes back to Latin. It doesn't go back to Greek. Now, learned Catholics, Jesuit priests, really heavy-duty priests, will learn Greek so they can understand where the Latin comes from. But the Latin Vulgate of St. Jerome is considered to be canonical, which means that you don't have to go back to the Greek. What he translated is considered to be the work of God. Do you guys follow this? It's divinely inspired. In that Latin Vulgate, when they translated the Old and the New Testament, they translated the book of Proverbs, which is actually written in Hebrew. And they translated the book of Proverbs from a Greek translation called the Septuagint. The Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek before Christ, and that became what became known as the Old Testament, which is portions of the Torah, most of the Torah, not quite all of it, and it was translated into Greek, and then that got translated into Latin, and that became the Catholic Old Testament, or it's translated directly into English from Greek, and that becomes the Old Testament in English. So in the book of Proverbs, there's a saying, a man's heart plans his path, and the Lord directs his step. So that's there in the Hebrew Bible. So now you're going back thousands of years. You're going back 2,500 years. The time of Buddha, it's old. If you listen to the Jews, you're going back almost 4,000 years. But at least you're going back. You're going back, to the first millenniums before the Common Era, and maybe to the second millennium. And there's this idea that you have your ideas, and then God assists you. So the whole humor thing is gone. But it's funny because the Jews are the people who speak Yiddish. You follow? And they made their statement from German. But if you trace back from the German, it goes back to Latin. If you trace back to Latin, it goes back to Greek and back to Hebrew. And actually the Jews were, with a number of intermediaries, they were quoting their own text. Did you guys follow this? But it went from Hebrew to Greek to Latin to German. Actually, and you have it in Spanish. All the Romance languages have it, because Latin is linked to all the Romance languages. So, el hombre propone y Dios dispone. You've heard that before? Have you heard that in Spanish? It's very common, saying in Spanish. They have it in French. They have it in all the Romance languages. I'm sure they have a Portuguese version also. But Yiddish doesn't come from Latin, so they had to go through German. So the Germans had to figure out a way to have that Latin saying in their own language. So they did the denkt and lenkt for propone y dispone in Latin. And then the Jews didn't have an easy rhyme because they were going from Yiddish, so they came up with last. But if you actually go back, it goes all the way back to the Hebrew Bible. You follow? So anyway, I was thinking about this idea. You'll get where I'm coming from, but I heard from my elders, if you want to make God laugh, tell him all your plans. I found out Woody Allen said that. Woody Allen's a good Jew, so he was quoting from the Yiddish. Der Mensch trankt und Gott lacht. And then that's der Mensch trankt und der Mensch denkt und Gott lenkt in German, which goes back to homo propone Deus dispone. It goes all the way back to Latin, which had to then get translated to German, but then worked its way into the modern Latin-based languages. El hombre propone Dios dispone. You know that, right, in Spanish? You've heard that? Maybe? You?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think so.
You're what?
I don't think so.
Were you born here?
No.
You were born in Mexico. When did you come here?
No, here.
Huh?
Here.
When you were really young. Okay. I've heard it in Spanish. You heard it in Spanish? It's like kind of well known, right? Yeah. It's really well known, you said, right?
Yeah.
Were you born in Mexico? You weren't. So the Mexican from Mexico doesn't know it, but the Chicana girl, Chicanx girl who was born here does. All right. Okay. Anyway, it's just fascinating, isn't it? How they use rhyming concepts, conditional statements. They added the humor element into it. But if you trace it all the way back, it goes all the way back to the book of Proverbs in Hebrew. Far out, right? Okay. I thought of that same when I thought of something else I want to talk about. We have a 16th, 17th century, early 17th century, late 16th century, early 17th century saying in one of our texts. It's not written in Sanskrit, it's written in Bengali, which is a vernacular language. Most of our sacred literature is written in Sanskrit. But because there was a major Bhakti renaissance that took place in Bengal, some of our sacred texts are written in Bengali. It was more of a common person's language. Instead of writing in the artificial language of Sanskrit, which was only decipherable by scholars, we did something similar to what the Germans did. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but the German language that we have now as a written language was developed to translate the Bible. Martin Luther, the father of the Lutheran Church, and really the genesis of the entire Protestant Reformation, he developed modern German. There was no German written language that was common for all the people, and he united High and Low German and formed a written language so that the Bible could be translated, so that he could take it out of the hands of the papacy, and the Catholic Church didn't control it anymore by having it in a language that nobody could read. That turned into the Anglican Church and the 1611 Bible, the St. James Bible, and became the entire Protestant Reformation, which is, 2 billion of the people in the world follow this Reformation movement. It's a big deal. And that all came from this idea to take the Bible out of the hands of priests and put it in the hands of people. So there was a similar phenomenon that took place in our tradition, and books were written in Bengali so they were easier to understand, because Sanskrit was more difficult. Bengali was like kind of a lingua franca. It was easier for people to follow. Everybody knew it. At least in the part of the world where our movement started growing up. There's another language called Braj Bhasha, which is spoken in northern India, which also it's also a poetic language. Where are you from? I know India, come on. I'm not blind. Which part of India? Oh, you're from South. I can't tell by the mask. I can't see your facial features. You're from South. If you're from North India, Braj Bhasha is a very, very famous poetic language. Anyway, many of our poems are written in Braj Bhasha, and many of them are written in Bengali. And that was an effort to take ancient Sanskrit concepts and make them easy to remember. You follow? Krishna Bhakta Nishkama Taiva Shant Bhukti Mukti Siddhi Kami Sakaliya Shant. Krishna Bhakta Nishkam Ataiva Shant Bhukti Mukti Siddhi Kami Sakaliya Shant. You can sing it. It's like a limerick. It's like a rhyming couplet. It's like a song. They're written in padas. They're meant to be sung. And so I was thinking about this one today. And then thinking about this one made me think of this English saying, was traced back to Yiddish, which to Woody Allen, was traced back to Yiddish, was traced back to German, was traced back to Latin, which then moved forward into Spanish and French and Portuguese, but you could trace it all the way back, and it took you all the way back to Hebrew. And so I was thinking about our own version of this. Krishna Bhakta. Who knows what Krishna Bhakta means? You all do. What's Krishna Bhakta mean? A devotee. No, that's Krishna Bhakti. Krishna Bhakta. You guys know what the word Bhakta means. Bhakta means devotee. Krishna Bhakta. You're not just a devotee, you're a devotee of Krishna. Krishna Bhakta Nishkam. Nishkam. Kam means desire. Nishkam means no desire. The devotee of Krishna is desireless. Ataiva Shant. Therefore he's peaceful. Ataeva. It's actually very close to Sanskrit. Ataiva means now, certainly. Shant. Like Shanti. You know, right? You've heard that, right? Shanti, Shanti. So that means peaceful. Krishna Bhakta Nishkam Ataiva Shant. The devotee of Krishna is desireless, and therefore he's peaceful. Bhukti Mukti Siddhi Kami. If you want Bhukti, Mukti, or Siddhi, you are Kami. You're not Nishkam, devoid of desire. You're Kami, you're filled with desire. Kami means possessing desire. Sakaliya Shant. And you're always unpeaceful. A lusty person is the most unpeaceful person in the world. When someone becomes lusty, they practically jump out of their skin. They make terrible decisions. You know? Right? Bhukti, Mukti, Siddhi. All these three types of people are kami. They're filled with desires, and therefore, sakali ashant. Kama, yoga, kami, yogi. One who does yoga is called a yogi. He possesses yoga. And one who has or possesses desires is called kami. Kama, kami. Yoga, yogi. Bhukti, mukti, siddhi, kami, sakali ashant. And therefore they're always unpeaceful. So now you got to know what these three terms mean. Bhukti, mukti, siddhi. Bhukti, mukti, siddhi. Bhukti means material enjoyment. If you want bhukti, you want material enjoyment. This corresponds to the path of karma, where you try to enjoy the world by the sweat off your own back. You try to do pious deeds and get ahead in the rat race and get the finer things in life and enjoy. That's called karma. And one who follows that path of trying to machine their way into happiness is called a karmi. Certain people are into this. They're very this worldly. They're very much about enjoying this world. They're materialistic, but they're willing to work hard for their materialism. She works hard for her money. That kind of idea. The sweat off my own back. You follow? You know the term moho? Moho? You know that term, moho? You know that term, moho? What does it mean?
In Spanish?
Yeah.
What?
Do you know what it refers to in slang?
I'm sorry?
Do you know what it refers to in slang?
Yes.
What's it refer to?
Somebody that crossed the states with water? Well, from Mexico here?
No, not exactly. That's okay. You don't know. Mojo is a derogatory term used by Mexican people to refer to their own people. It's used by Chicanos, people who are Mexican, but they're born in the U.S. And it refers to the mojos. The mojos are the Mexicans from Mexico who are wetbacks. They came over here. One theory is that it's because they crossed by water, but that's not actually it. They're wetbacks because their back is wet. I mean, they'd be whole body wets if they... They're wetbacks because their back is wet because they're working in the sun. They're doing farming. Because the original Mexican immigrants to this country worked on farms. And so they would toil in the long sun and their backs would be wet, just like rednecks. Their necks are red because they're out in the sun farming all day, and they're wearing a shirt, but their necks get red. Rednecks. You follow? Wetbacks. So wetbacks is a derogatory English term for Mexican people. Mojo is a derogatory Spanish term used by, like the Chicano gang I was a part of. Now they let people from Mexico in because there's not so many Chicanos being born or joining gangs, so they got to let Mexican immigrants in. But the Chicano gang I was a part of growing up, they didn't let Mexicans who were born in Mexico join the gang. They were racist against Mexicans from Mexico. You could only join the gang if you were Mexican but born in the U.S. Did you guys follow this? And they derogatorily referred to those Mexicans from Mexico that we didn't want to hang with as mojos. You know this? You don't know this? As far as the stuff I got swimming around in my head, huh? So, how'd I come up with that? Oh, a karmi. They're not afraid to work hard. They're not afraid to sweat. I'll enjoy this world, but by the sweat off their own back. It's interesting that people were derogatorily referred to for their work ethic. Because they're willing to work hard, people referred to them in a negative way and criticized them. But what they were criticized for was their work ethic, and they're willing to perform austerities to get ahead in this country and do jobs other people didn't want to do to make it. So, that's a karmi. You have a strong desire to enjoy, but you want to do it right. You want to do it piously. You want to do the right thing. People who want to cheat the system and they want to enjoy, they're called vikarmis. They're materialists, but they're bad materialists. So a bad materialist in the language of the Gita is called a vikarmi. A good materialist is called a karmi. One who wants to enjoy, they pick the word, instead of karmi, they pick the word bhukti because it rhymes. Bhukti, mukti, siddhi. It rhymes nicely, doesn't it? Bhukti, mukti. It rhymes really nicely. So bhukti is another word for bhukta, for one who wants to enjoy. So if you want to enjoy materially, pious or impious, it's actually a better term because it refers to a materialist generally conceived as opposed to one who follows the rules or doesn't follow the rules. Both of them are considered bhukti. It's more of a catch-all term. Mukti. What's mukti mean? Liberation. Bhukti, enjoyment. Mukti, liberation. Siddhi. Siddhi refers to perfections that are aspired for by yogis. Yogis search after siddhi. Siddha. They become siddha. They search after siddhi. If you search after mukti, you become a mukta. So if the word ends with an I, then it ends with an A. So bhakti, you become a bhakta. Mukti, you want liberation, you become a mukta. Siddhi, you become a siddha. Siddha means a perfected being. But it doesn't mean perfected like spiritually perfected. It means material perfection. You become incredibly intelligent, able to manipulate other people. You're able to live for a very long time. You're able to control other people. You become incredibly powerful or opulent. These are the things, if you read the old yoga literature, the medieval yoga literature, you'll see that they weren't actually after liberation. They were after power. They were like alchemists. They were the medieval version of alchemists who were trying to find the philosopher's stone. They were trying to turn lead into gold. And they were trying to discover the universal solvent and the fountain of youth. Marco Polo wrote that he met the Giugis who drank mercury and lived for 200 years because they used to drink mercury because they were full-blown, crazy, psycho alchemists. And they would drink mercury as some kind of an incredible tonic. You even find it appearing in all sorts of Ayurvedic medicines. Although it's like one of the most potent poisons known to man. So anyway, you ever heard that term mad as a hatter? You know where that comes from? Look at you, man, Mr. Fancy. Hatters used to make hats out of felt. Part of the felt process is they would use mercury to somehow or other make the felt into felt. And then by working with Mercury for years and years, they become crazy. And so you were mad as a hatter because all hatters went crazy because they were working with Mercury. Weirdly, we decided to put mercury in our teeth, and that used to be like the substance you would use for doing fillings. I don't know, like, why they did that. It's like, let's take this incredibly poisonous substance and put it in your teeth. Anyway, I do know why they did it, but it's a terrible idea. So yeah, I don't know how I got on the Mad as a Hatter. Oh, they were drinking mercury. Marco Polo mentions this in the 14th century, 13th, 14th century, that he met jiujis, his term for yogis, and they drank mercury. They were alchemists. So the original yogis were like the boogeymen, they were like wizards, they were like warlocks, they were like alchemists. They were that kind of tribe. And they were after siddhi, material perfections, power. And so they're criticized by our tradition. Bhukti, mukti, siddhi, you're the same. Whether you're a materialist, licitly or illicitly trying to enjoy the world, like a lusty person on the street, whether you want liberation, or whether you want some kind of material perfection, you want to be able to fly. Not in an airplane, but like with your mind. Kami, you're all the same. You're all lusty. Sakaliya shunt, and therefore you're always unpeaceful. You're never peaceful. Krishna bhakta nishkama taiva shant bhukti mukti siddhi kami sakaliya shant. This is our version of a lyric. This is our version of a poem. This is our version of a limerick. This is our version of like a Yiddish saying, or something like that. It packs a wallop. It's so deep you can lecture on it. It wasn't just comprised to make words fit together and the laugh is chosen instead of disposes because you don't have a rhyming word. It was really carefully thought out. I was thinking about this verse. If you come into this world and if you have a bunch of desires of things you want to accomplish, but you get a mixed bag. You get dealt a hand in this lifetime that's the sum total of everything you've done in all your previous lifetimes. You are the fruit of everything you've ever done. You follow? Like if somebody's born really ugly, you get into a thing. It's like if God was all good, He wouldn't want to just make somebody ugly unnecessarily. And the fact that some people are born beautiful means everybody could be born beautiful, because if God's omnipotent and He makes one person be born beautiful, He can make everybody be born beautiful. So if you don't want to get rid of your idea that God exists and one person's born beautiful and somebody else is born ugly, you got to figure out a way where that's not just arbitrary on God's part. If you try to exonerate the person from responsibility for that and blame their parents for this, that pretty soon you have a castrated, neutered deity that's no longer all powerful. Or you have a jerk deity who's no longer all good. Either way, God's either not worthy of worship, right? Or He doesn't exist. And so if you're born profoundly ugly or beautiful, you did something to deserve that. If you're born in a rough situation, you did something to deserve that. The immediate cause is your parents or whatever else happened. But philosophically, you have to take ownership of it. So when you show up in this world, although ultimately, remotely, you do deserve everything you got, and you did craft it. You didn't craft it in this lifetime, and therefore your trivial desires from this lifetime don't necessarily correspond with what you deserve based on what you've done. Like if a guy shows up and he's in prison for murder, he's like, I want to go and climb Mount Everest right now. Sorry, Charlie, you don't get to do that. Well, I should be able to do whatever I want to do, and how come I can't do that? Other people can. That means there's something wrong with God. No, you committed murder, and therefore you're in prison. But if you go back lifetimes, you might show up and have some kind of infantile desires. You don't see the big picture, and it's not in the cards for you. If you want to try and control it, it's like my guru told me, if you want to try to control the waves, you're going to suffer. You can't control the waves. They control you. You got to learn to swim with them. There are forces in this world that are much bigger than we are. And we might have created our circumstance, ultimately. But once we wind up here, we have to learn to be sensitive and feel what's going on. So as I started thinking about this idea, what I want to talk about today, I started thinking, well, what's a Western equivalent of that? And I came up with this. If you want to make God laugh, tell him all your plans. The purport to that statement that nobody bothers to flesh out is don't make too many plans in this world. Figure out what God's plan is. And learn to be a part of something bigger than yourself and stop trying to engineer your own thing and machine your own thing and start to try and figure out what is meant for you, what is intended for you, what your ultimate purpose is, what is your raison d'etre, what is your reason for existence. We have a common reason for existence. We exist to cultivate love for Krishna. That's for everybody. But then there's more specific, how can I cultivate that love for Krishna? Well, we have a basic program for that too. You chant and you follow, or we have do's and don'ts and stuff like that. But then there's like, well, what do I do with the rest of my time? It's a much less important question, actually. But it's still there. How can I contribute to the upliftment of the world? And that starts to get into who are you? What are your God-given talents? What are your limitations? What are your qualifications? What do you love to do? What are you good at? What does the world need? What can you monetize? And you figure out a way to put it all together. If you're a little people and you want to be a basketball player in the NBA, it's probably not going to happen. You follow? You didn't get that God-given talent of being tall. You can certainly play basketball. There's nothing wrong with that. You see the Oaxacans, they're out there playing basketball in every park in Southern California. Are you from Oaxaca? No? You know the people I'm talking about, right? Like super short, super mountainous, and like always ready for a fight. Most people don't know this, but if you're Mexican. It's like that doesn't really tell you a whole lot. It's like saying you're Indian. It doesn't tell you a whole lot. Like they're like, we're Indian. I'm like, what does that tell me? Each state has a whole different thing going on. Like they're from South, so that could mean Kerala, but they're not from Kerala because nobody's from Kerala. So they're either from Tamil Nadu or they're from Andhra Pradesh. They could be from Karnataka, but again, that's not quite as likely. Most probably they're from Tamil Nadu or Andhra Pradesh. Which one are you from? They're from Andhra, so they speak Telugu. Oh, you're from Karnataka? Look at that. So they're like unusual. They're from Karnataka. Although there's a lot of like, Bangalore is so big and there's so many really smart computer people coming out of that place. So we're finding more people from Karnataka here. So anyway, you're from Southern Maharashtra is also sometimes considered to be South India. Kind of northern Karnataka, southern Maharashtra is the same culture. They drew a straight line, but it's really the same culture. So similarly, if you're from Mexico, there's all sorts of different places in Mexico. And there's different cultures in each place you go to. There's some common features, but there's differences as well. So part of figuring out what you're meant to do is what you're good at. Like I was just talking to Shri today, and a lot of people, if you're too gut-wrenchingly honest, a lot of people get turned off if you're too gut-wrenchingly honest, because it just like rubs them the wrong way, and they see it as weakness or something like that. They don't have time for it. That grosses them out, repulses them. But Shri and I aren't like that. When people are really gut-wrenchingly honest, we don't get repulsed, do we? We get empathetic because we're empaths. A term which comes from a 1968 episode of Star Trek. And it's used to say to somebody else that you're better than them. It's also used to tell them to get away from you and not to like give you too much of yourself to them because you're going to contaminate them because they're just so spiritual that they'll like absorb your negativity. So it's amazing it's used to narcissistically push people away and at the same time say that you're superior to them. And it entered the English language through Star Trek. Even the term empathy is only about 100 years old in the US. Anyway, so in English, it's only about 100 years old. 150 years old. Yeah, so Shri is her ideal career as a therapist. She doesn't mind talking to people about whatever they're going through in life. That's not everybody's like that. She's like that. It's special. Everybody's got something special about them. Something amazing. Something they're really good at. Something they're natural at. And it's like part of finding your calling in life is not trying to be somebody else and being comfortable being yourself and doing what you're good at. And not trying to be somebody else. Try and keep up with the Joneses. Try and be like the cool kids. Try and do what they're doing. And a lot of times you end up like being like a little person. Somehow this Zoom ended. Somehow, you end up trying to be a little person playing in the NBA when there's something else you could be doing that's amazing. And so we should find out what we're good at, what we enjoy, but we need to hey everybody, sorry about that. I got kicked off of Zoom, didn't like me. I was speaking bad about the little people, and so I got condemned. We got to figure out, what we're good at, what we're made to do, how we can contribute, what our skill set is. There's the basics. We should all do kirtan. We should all chant japa. We should all follow the basic rules of humanity. We should all cultivate love for Krishna. That's really nice. We hand you a template like that. But then there's what are you going to do in this world? And it's about learning to flex and be a part of something bigger than yourself and flow with the waves and move with things and adjust yourself. Krishna's always tinkering with you and putting things in your life to move you in the right direction. If you become sensitive, you can feel it. In the beginning, we need elders to point out what's obvious to everybody else because we miss the forest for the trees. But as we grow up in our spiritual life, we're able to feel it. We're able to move, and we're able to feel Krishna moving us and giving us opportunities to become our best selves and use what life throws at us to do something beautiful and make something artistic and be poetic and live a life of poetry and a life of devotion. We got lessons to learn. By the time Krishna's teaching you a lesson, it usually comes with some pain. You didn't listen, so he's got to push you. He's got to sculpt you. He's got to melt you to make you. He's like a sculptor. He's got to melt you to make you. But he's not trying to melt you and get rid of you. He's trying to get rid of all the stuff you're not and all the people you're copying. You're copying the wrong people. You're not imitating Christ. You're imitating Mammon. And so Krishna's got that dexterous dance where he's got to push you without compromising your free will. He's got to give you opportunities without forcing you to take them, which will compromise your free will. And we live in this world where Krishna's really organizing things for us and helping us to become a better person and helping us to move forward, helping us to discover our God-given talents and help us to live a life of purpose and meaning and do something amazing in this world if we just let him. And so, whereas the statement, if you want to make God laugh, tell him all your plans, implicitly it has this idea that our plans aren't such a big deal. I feel like this verse from our tradition, the devotee of Krishna is desireless because he just wants what Krishna wants. And therefore he's peaceful because he can float. He can wake up and be like, my dear Lord Krishna, what do you want from me today? I'm ready to do what you want. I'm ready to be your instrument. I'm ready to move in the direction you want me to go. I have faith in you. I trust you. I have confidence in you. I want to be molded. I want to grow. I'm not afraid because I'm in the hands of the best sculptor. I'm not afraid because I've got the best driver. I'm not afraid because I know that you're not trying to crush me. I know that you're all good and all powerful and you can do all things. I don't have an agenda. I want to mold myself to your agenda. That mindset makes you peaceful. Because you got nothing that you need in this world that you might not get. Because what you want is what Krishna wants for you, and you can have confidence it'll be arranged. So you're peaceful. But whether you're a bhukti, a mukti, or whether you want bhukti or mukti or siddhi, it doesn't make a difference. Whether you want material enjoyment or liberation, even liberation, you have a desire. That's the jnani. He wants liberation. The yogi wants perfection. It's a critique of karma, jnana, and yoga. It's what it is compared to bhakti. The statement packs a wallop. And in a lot of ways, it fleshes out what's implied in that statement. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. It goes so far beyond man proposes and God disposes. Because that indicates that we're the genesis and God is just dancing the beat of our drum. You follow? It gives credit, like we need help. We're riding in the car and God's the driver and we tell him what to do and he does it. It's a little pious. It's like we acknowledge that God's driving, but we're still narcissistically telling God what to do. You follow? That's not so cool. So the Latin messed it up. They messed it up. They went in the wrong direction. Actually, in a lot of ways, the Yiddish statement brings it back. So I thought about this verse, then I thought about the English, then I traced it all back for you guys and had some fun with it so we could get back to this verse. I wanted to give you guys some of the background of the verse so you would be able to appreciate how deep it is. I wanted to give a little simple lyric. Krishna Bhakta Nishkam Ataiva Shant Bhukti Mukti Siddhi Kami Sakali Ashant Krishna Bhakta Nishkam Ataiva Shant Bhukti Mukti Siddhi Kami Sakali Ashant. Okay. I think that's it. I think I said what I came here to say. I'm going to take questions. Should I leave it on because I got a few minutes left, or should we call it for IGTV? Huh? Adios, amigo X on IGTV.